Good evening and welcome to ABN's Jihad Watch program. I'm Robert Spencer and we're continuing this week with our interviews with noted freedom fighters in America today. And I'm very pleased to say that tonight we have with us one of the most renowned and notorious of those freedom fighters in the last few weeks, and that is former FBI agent John Guandolo, who is, of course, the source for the blockbuster revelation that Barack Obama's nominee to be the director of the CIA, John Brennan, is actually a convert to Islam. Welcome, John, and can you tell us a little bit about the background here? Why is it that you believe, how is it that you came to know that Brennan is a Muslim?
Robert, and hello to your audience. Well, specifically, when John Brennan was the chief of station for the CIA in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, in the late 1990s, I have direct sources who were on the ground there, who were government officials, and they have direct knowledge that he was not only befriended by employees of the Saudi government and Saudi intelligence, but that as the culmination of this relationship, he converted to Islam while serving as the senior U.S. intelligence representative for the United States.
And so the first and obvious question here is, why would it matter? I remember a few years back when there was all the controversy about whether Barack Obama was a secret Muslim, and Colin Powell indignantly said, well, what would it matter if he were? And the whole story was framed as if racist, intolerant, Islamophobic bigots were trying to imply that Obama was some kind of terrorist, when obviously if he were a Muslim, then he would have been a peaceful Muslim and a deeply patriotic one, and so on and so on. And the idea that Brennan is a Muslim has gotten the same response. People saying, so what's the big deal if he is? So what is the big deal if he is?
Well, I think two big points and then several smaller points. The big point is it would show he's easily manipulated. This was an operation by Saudi intelligence, and really the conversion was the culmination of an operation to recruit John Brennan and to befriend him in order to get him. Certainly we can assume, based on these kinds of operations in the past, that the point is to get him, a senior U.S. official serving as the #1 CIA person in all of Saudi Arabia, to be soft on Saudi Arabia. Now, so that's the first thing, is I think it goes to the fact that he did not even recognize that this was a significant event. And to say the Shahada, as I've heard several commentators say, and I do agree with them, I think if he were in a different part of the world, he might have as easily been manipulated, to follow something else. But this is where he spent time growing up, and it shows that he is not somebody who's going to act out of U.S. principles and founding principles as an American government official, that he is very easily swayed, number one, and number two, he has demonstrated, not only by the fact that he converted to Islam, and again, going to the so who cares, but it absolutely highlights that he is easily manipulated. And as an intelligence official, that is a disqualifying factor right off the bat.
I see.
Now, okay,
John,
so that's first big point. Yes, sir.
Well, you said Saudi influence, that if he was converted under the auspices of the Saudis, so that he would be soft on Saudi Arabia. Could you unpack that a little bit for us and explain, well, what would the implications of that be? After all, Saudi Arabia is nominally a U.S. ally, and so what would be the problem with having a U.S. official who is favorable towards Saudi Arabia?
That's a great question, because as the senior CIA representative on the ground in Saudi Arabia, even in the late 1990s, Saudi Arabia, by our own government testimony in front of the Congress, reports that have been given at various levels of the federal government in the United States, Saudi Arabia funds to the tune of billions of dollars the global jihad. Many of the financial efforts have gone to Al Qaeda. And while that is a larger discussion, because a lot of the questions I certainly receive and others is, well, why would Saudi Arabia, spend billions of dollars to fund the global jihad if it includes funding Al Qaeda, who is trying now to take down the Saudi regime? And so both of these things, I think both of these issues are linked. The idea that the American government views Saudi Arabia as an ally, which I think is grossly mistaken. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, two countries that we call allies, are two of our most virulent enemies. But they give us the facade of being friendly. And even as an FBI agent, we worked cases with Saudi intelligence, and they did provide information that led to the capture of certain individuals. But in my experience and the experience of my colleagues inside the government, the Saudi officials will only give you an Al Qaeda operative or another senior guy or anybody at any level if they believe you already know that they're there. We've had instances where they've given us bad guys, and only to find out later there were several other key individuals that they knew about literally co-located with the other guy that they gave us or turned over to us. So they're playing both sides of the fence, and that's what they're doing with Al Qaeda. And I love the quote from Winston Churchill that an appeaser is someone who feeds the alligator hoping it will eat him last. And I believe that's what Saudi Arabia has been doing for years. But I believe that Al Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood are going to see Saudi Arabia come down. And I believe they are, and they've demonstrated in the last few years that they are intent on having a day of rage in Saudi Arabia and toppling the regime. And these things, what you're asking, are not separate. I believe they're linked, both from a political and policy standpoint, but also going into why it matters. I think it matters because John Brennan isn't the story. John Brennan is a symptom. John Brennan isn't the problem. John Brennan is a symptom of the problem. And the problem is, we could speak probably for much more than an hour about the problems in the U.S. government, but specifically with regards to this is, number one, foremost, counterintelligence in the United States is dead. It is broken, and it's grossly broken to the point where, as you well know, we can't identify our enemy. Specifically, if you just look at the Islamic threat, we can't repeat back what Al Qaeda says. We can't repeat back publicly what the Muslim Brotherhood says about themselves, or we are called, or individuals that do that, even on a professional, factual, and evidentiary basis, are ridiculed for speaking factually and truthfully about a absolute imminent threat. Well, you could take this anywhere you want, whether it's China, whether it's the fact that Russia just flew Bear bombers with nukes on it over Guam. These are real significant threats to the United States. And to bring it right back to John Brennan, it comes down to an unprofessional leadership cadre in many of these areas of our government. And John Brennan is one example. There are very professional men and women trying to do their best. And when they pop their heads up and speak truthfully about this particular issue, they are also beaten down. And so somebody like John Brennan, who has a very soft approach, and I would say his approach assists and aids the enemy, not the policies and the intents of the U.S. government, which is his job or will be his job as if he becomes the director of Central Intelligence, but it is his job as the advisor to the president right now, and he's not doing it.
John, you had mentioned before, okay, that this shows that he's easily led, which is just the last quality that you want in an intelligence officer, and that he can be manipulated. And there were also other reasons, I believe, that is the foundation for the contention that this is not just a matter of his personal faith, but something that should seriously have a serious impact upon his being the CIA director.
Right. I think a couple other key points that are important. Number one is under the direction of John Brennan, senior Hamas operatives and Hamas leaders of Hamas support entities that are Muslim Brotherhood in the United States, under the direction of John Brennan, have been given unprecedented access to senior government officials, to advisory positions within the government. And I'll just give you, 3 or 4 quick examples. Jihad Watch, one of the leaders of Hamas in the United States, and that's a fact, that's not conjecture. We have from documents that were recovered in an FBI raid in 2004 in the state of Virginia in the United States. We have documents that demonstrate that the organizations in which he's been in leadership positions in are Hamas entities, the Islamic Association of Palestine, and then the Council on American Islamic Relations. That was also not only found in documents about these organizations, the organizational charts, the names, his name on a list of Hamas leaders in the United States, all entered into evidence in the largest Hamas trial in U.S. history. But the prosecution, in looking at the abundance and multitude of evidence in that case, United States versus Holy Land Foundation, also says that CARE was the 4th Hamas front organization created in the United States. Well, when these organizations, to include the Islamic Society of North America, the largest Muslim Brotherhood entity in the United States, whose leader sits on the Homeland Security Advisory Committee, advising Secretary Napolitano, who has been brought in by John Brennan to brief National Security Council and national security staffs. Jihad Watch, the Hamas leader, who's been brought in under the direction of John Brennan into the White House to brief national security staffs. This can only be considered criminal acts. There are only 1 or 2 options here, and that is that John Brennan is completely unaware of who just these 2 individuals, and there are others, just who these 2 individuals are, and in which case that makes him wholly unfit for duty in any position, to be an analyst in the national security realm, because the factual evidence on who these guys are is clear. So he's either unfit because he's intellectually incapable of holding the position and of reasonable thought and discernment, or he knows who they are and he still did it. And that's a much more significant problem, because then you're talking about treason and willfully giving enemies of the United States access to senior leaders, information, giving them temporary or other clearances. And we know some people, like Muslim Brother and Hamas operative Mohammed El-Abiyari, who also served on the DHS, the Homeland Security Advisory Committee, to Secretary Napolitano. He had a clearance. So these men are given clearances by the U.S. government. And if somebody is wittingly, knowingly doing this, well, then that's a criminal act.
So you're saying that Brennan is either clueless or complicit?
What are the other options?
Yeah, I see your point. Is there any way to go farther and to try to determine whether he is one or the other, or is that just impossible without some sort of statement or investigation of Brennan himself?
Right. Well, certainly an investigation, but just, he's been before the Senate committee. I mean, where were the questions? And what I'm presenting now is what has been known for several years about these individuals. And this is not difficult to find information with regards to men like Jihad Watch, Mohammed El-Abiyari, Mohammed Majid, the president of ISNA, who is the individual who serves on the Homeland Security Advisory Committee, has been to the White House numerous times. And under Mr. Brennan's direction, has been brought into the White House again to brief national security staff I mean, the Deputy National Security Advisor to the President of the United States, now the new Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough, held a "You're the Greatest Guy in the World" event for Mohammed Majid at Mohammed Majid's mosque here in Virginia a year ago, March. I mean, these are the kind of things that are going on where we're not only just not, where the government is not only not taking action on these individuals and organizations that we know are hostile and terrorist organizations, but they're aiding and abetting them. And it's at a point, this has to be treated.
Oh, yeah.
They have to be treated as criminals. The government officials have to be treated as criminals because they're committing treason.
John, how did it come about that the same U.S. government that has identified the Council on American Islamic Relations as a Hamas-linked Muslim Brotherhood front group and the Islamic Society of North America as another Hamas-linked Muslim Brotherhood front group would be playing ball with both of them and turning around and pretending that none of this is true? How on earth did this happen?
That is a great question, and I would love to answer it. In the Holy Land Foundation case, the case agents, the Joint Terrorism Task Force folks, and agents all around the country that had investigations that touched on this, which there are many, worked diligently and still work diligently on these issues. The problem is at the leadership level, not just in the FBI, at DHS, at the White House, and really across the spectrum, to bring this up in any way, shape, or form that this has anything to do with Muslims or Islam, as you have seen and as your viewers likely have read about, leads to these kind of discussions being completely shut down inside the government. And if I may just take one quick tangent, all training inside the U.S. government that discusses the Muslim Brotherhood, the Holy Land Foundation, and the implications, because the implications of the case are nearly every single Islamic organization in North America is part of the Muslim Brotherhood network. The vast majority are, as a matter of fact. And that is the support network for Hamas and other violent jihadi organizations. Well, that's huge. But the fact that law enforcement at the state, local, and federal level are not being taught that is the key. And so you've got several things going on. That's a result of the leadership shutting this down. So while from the ground level, an assistant U.S. attorney, case agents, supervisors in the FBI and other federal and state organizations, law enforcement intelligence organizations, are able to bring together, and actually foreign partners are able to bring together a case which is the largest terrorism financing and Hamas case in our history, and prosecute it. And then to have 312 names on the unindicted co-conspirator list, and have this Justice Department say, we're not going to pursue any of them, even though investigators and agents and U.S. attorneys are ready to go forward. How is that possible? It's possible because of this massive schism between the leadership in the government and the men and women that are working their tails off on the street every day and going after bad guys. And it's getting tighter and tighter for the agents to be able to do their job, because every time they step out to actually go after a bad guy, they are in many cases, both via the policy that is in place and specifically inside the FBI, but also in the training realm, in the U.S. Attorney's Office, they are really focusing in just on acts of violence and major support. But the idea of going after the Muslim Brotherhood network here is absolutely off the table.
Well,
For the very
John,
reason
I recall a few years back, I was talking with Robert Leiken of the Nixon Center, which is a think tank in Washington, and he was arguing with me, saying that the Muslim Brotherhood, because they did not advocate terrorism, should be cultivated. And he actually ended up writing, not long after that, a position paper recommending that the United States engage with the Muslim Brotherhood because they were moderates. Now, of course, the Muslim Brotherhood is, according to a captured internal document, dedicated to eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within. But it does seem as if Lycan's position has won the day in the U.S. government. Is that right?
I believe it is not only right, it's won the day um, as it cuts across all the facts and the evidence that's on the table. In other words, that side of the argument has not one shred of factual evidence that the Muslim Brotherhood, number one, is not a violent organization. Historically, factually, and in their own doctrines, as you just said, they are absolutely, fight the tyrants and the enemies of Allah wherever you may find them as a prelude to establish the Islamic State. That's a quote from the MB bylaws that up until just a couple years ago, when the revolution began, which our government called the Arab Spring, when the Muslim Brotherhood revolution in the Middle East took place, those bylaws were up on their website in English. So Mr. Lakin, I believe, and those of his ilk are psychotically disconnected from reality. And that's the only practical explanation. Some would say, and since we're speaking on Christian channels, that obviously they're spiritually blinded. Whatever the case is, his inability to see a mountain of factual evidence about who they are is clearly his inability to reason and discern. So anything that he would put out on this topic, I would consider it wholly useless. But the government, in fact, that's exactly the position they've taken.
And Brennan himself has been in the lead with this, and with the initiative that you touched on before to purge all the intelligence documents and all the training materials for FBI agents, for the CIA, for Homeland Security, whatever, of any mention of Islam and jihad, which renders us wholly unprepared to understand and deal with the threat that the jihadis face. But Brennan was absolutely at the forefront of that effort, this great purge, was he not?
Yes, absolutely. And again, when maybe for your listeners, let me make this statement, and if you believe we need to go into greater detail, I certainly will. But we know that all of the Islamic advisors at the senior levels of the U.S. government are, in fact, either Muslim Brotherhood, Muslim brothers themselves, or in the case of people like Dalia Mogahed, Ingrid Mattson, and others, they're absolutely ideologically aligned with the brothers, and they're part of the Muslim sisterhood. This is not conjecture. It's not speculation. These are facts that are nailed down in concrete through documents that we recovered in a raid that we were not intended to see, that are Muslim Brotherhood documents, that are recorded conversations in Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood meetings, source information that we've gathered over the last 25 years in the United States. This is nailed down. And so there is no factual argument that contradicts what we're discussing here today.
It's breathtaking, and I think that people who dismiss the Muslim Brotherhood infiltration into the U.S. government as being some sort of paranoid conspiracy theory have never examined this evidence and the pedigrees, the allegiances, the alliances of the people that you've mentioned. I think that we do need to spend a little bit more time on this, but we're coming up to the break. Just in about a minute before the break, what I wanted to ask you is, would you say that there is any branch or any agency in Washington that has not been subjected to this infiltration?
No.
Not a one?
No.
So the effort has been extremely thorough, very carefully thought out, and the response on our part has been complete naivete and denial.
Right. And if you look at it, it's brilliant when the leadership of these governmental organizations, departments, cabinet members, when they turn for advice, or they turn and say, is this true? And the person they're talking to is a Muslim brother. Not only is that a phenomenal influence operation from their perspective, it's not only gross negligence and unprofessionalism on the part of that government appointee, government employee, whoever they are. When we can demonstrate that Americans are getting killed because of this, that becomes a criminal matter. And we put lawyers and doctors in jail for these kinds of things. And I think national security professionals can be held to the same standard.
Yeah, I certainly believe that. I hope that comes to pass, but there would certainly have to be a very thoroughgoing regime change before that could happen.
Agreed.
Well, this has been an extraordinarily fascinating discussion, and we're going to continue on the other side of the break. We're going to have a few important messages now, and we'll be right back. I am Robert Spencer with ABN's Jihad Watch program, and we are interviewing former FBI agent John Guandolo, who has explosive revelations about Muslim Brotherhood infiltration in the U.S. government. We'll be right back with more after this. Good evening and welcome back to ABN's Jihad Watch program. I am Robert Spencer. We are discussing today John Brennan and Islam, or more largely the Muslim Brotherhood infiltration into the U.S. government, with former FBI agent John Guandolo, who broke the story about Brennan's conversion to Islam and who has inside information from his time in the FBI, as well as years of observation of the U.S. government agencies of this Muslim Brotherhood infiltration. Now, John, thank you again for being with us. And you had said before that the Muslim Brotherhood operatives are embedded deeply into the U.S. government. We've named Muhammad Ali Biari, Mohammed Majid, and others in on the Homeland Security Advisory Council. There was a great deal made about Michelle Bachmann's request for an investigation of Muslim Brotherhood infiltration into the U.S. government, and of course this was largely dismissed by the U.S. government itself, by the mainstream media, and so on. It was ridiculed as being hysterical, and one of the leaders of the attacks on Bachmann was Keith Ellison, the Muslim congressman from Minnesota. But Ellison himself also has ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, does he not?
He certainly is very close with Hamas leaders and Muslim Brotherhood leaders in the United States, yes.
You know, Ellison took a pilgrimage to Mecca a few years back, and he accepted $13,350 to fund that pilgrimage from the Muslim American Society. Now, is that not another Muslim Brotherhood organization?
Yes, the Muslim American Society was actually founded by three of the most senior Muslim brothers in the United States, including the General Masul, the general guide of the Muslim Brotherhood. At the time, it was founded in the early 90s, Al-Qadi. And the reason that this is important, well, and also MAS officials actually publicly said that they were founded by the Brotherhood, and the U.S. government in court proceedings in the appellate proceedings for the Sabri Ben Khalil case said the Muslim American Society is the overt arm of the Muslim Brotherhood in America, unquote. So yes, they are. Excuse me, and they are also another significant organization here.
So we have the specter of a congressman. We have a congressman, a United States representative, taking $13,350 from a known Muslim Brotherhood organization. Now, can you imagine what the outcry would have been if Keith Ellison had taken $13,350 from the Aryan Nations or the Ku Klux Klan or something like that, and yet a group that is dedicated, in its own words, to eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within? That's just fine, and nobody makes a peep about it. It seems to me that that's very great confirming evidence of what you're saying about how compromised the U.S. government already is, that there has been no outcry, no investigation, no call for Keith Ellison to resign from Congress. Nobody seems to care at all.
And as we noted, those who do care get smacked down. A couple points you bring up that I'd like to touch on, because they relate back to John Brennan also. But in the Keith Ellison piece, he is very close with Jihad Watch, one of the Hamas leaders in the United States, who we discussed earlier. And when we talk about people who bring this up, there were 5 members of Congress, including Congresswoman Bachmann, who wrote letters to the 5 most senior inspector generals in the United States requesting investigations into the Muslim Brotherhood penetration of the U.S. government, because each of these congressmen and women had seen the evidence. They took the time and literally painstakingly went through the evidence and realized, and one of those was Congressman Louis Gohmert, who was an appellate judge. And so you're talking about people who aren't unfamiliar with our legal system. They're members of Congress. They've gone through the evidence, and they're trying to sound the alarm. And when John Brennan, this past summer 2012, was asked what he thought of this request by Bachmann, Congresswoman Bachmann, he literally laughed it off. And that is just yet not only another indicator of John Brennan's either gross ignorance or, his willingness to defend and aid and abet the enemy. It's one of those, but it's evidence of a complete and catastrophic leadership failure in the United States. And as I think a lot of people are aware, this isn't the only issue regarding our security that is at stake here. I mean, the infrastructure of the United States that's being ignored, the nuclear weapons that we're not maintaining, our nuclear weapons program, the shrinking of the U.S. Army, U.S. Marine Corps, and the Navy, and especially strategic parts of the Navy that we need to maintain. And again, these things like the massive counterintelligence threat from China, the massive cyber threat from China, Russia flexing its muscle, and us doing nothing. We haven't even talked about North Korea, Iran, and the rest.
Well, John, it does raise the question in specific connection to the Muslim Brotherhood as to whether these Muslim Brotherhood operatives placed into the U.S. government, including Brennan, had some responsibility for the Obama administration's disastrous endorsement of the Muslim Brotherhood takeover of Egypt.
Well, of course they did. And let me give you a couple key nuggets that help for your audience, that help kind of fine tune that. Is number one, 2 of the key directors, Mohammed el-Sanusi and Syed Syed, 2 of the senior directors for the Islamic Society of North America, which the United States government and the federal judge and the appellate panel that all kind of looked over the evidence and had to make a determination on this in the Holy Land Foundation case. Couple things. ISNA is not only a Muslim Brotherhood entity, it is a Hamas support entity, specifically a financial support entity, as well as obviously propaganda and everything else, but primarily raised money for Hamas, and that was demonstrated in the HLF case because we have their documents. So that's a done deal. We know that. Two of their senior directors are advisors to Secretary Clinton, who has now left, and now Secretary Kerry is in there as Secretary of State. So that's the first point. So yes, their influence is huge. The president of ISNA, as I mentioned before, Mohammed Majid, also is a part of that team. But the two directors that I just named spend the most time working with the State Department. Those same two directors of ISNA were also present at the hearing a year ago, August, when Senator Richard Durbin held hearings on the civil rights of Muslims in the United States. And he publicly thanked ISNA for providing them lots of information, providing the Senate staff lots of information to prepare them for the hearings. I mean, the evidence is everywhere. So now take that. And when we go back to what the administration calls the Arab Spring, we have a State Department in the United States that says this is a freedom movement led by students who organized on Twitter. This is asinine. This is a complete disconnect from reality. As a matter of fact, I want to share this, and I'm going to share this just as a data point for your audience. We briefed the organization I previously was with, which was just essentially three of us. We briefed in November, prior to the quote-unquote Arab Spring, 2 months before in January when the Arab Spring took place, in November, briefed members of Congress that this was going to happen, that there was going to be a revolution in the Middle East, that it would begin in Egypt, that here are the nation states that are going to be toppled, that they will go after Saudi Arabia, and that Syria will not fall, and we explicitly said why. And in fact, there was some very serious concern, but some doubt in the room that day. And yet, after the quote unquote Arab Spring, which is the Muslim revolution in the Middle East, once that was well underway, obviously we got phone calls to come back and brief up on the Hill and say, well, how did you know that? They say, well, because we read English and we listen to what they say. You know, these guys are not hiding their agenda now. Absolutely. And they're more out in the open now than they've ever been. And all you got to do is listen to them and believe that they're serious about what they're saying, because thousands of people are being killed, countries are being taken over, and literally now tens of thousands of innocent people are being slaughtered in across the world. It's what we're seeing in the Middle East. We're seeing it in Africa, and we're going to see it here. This is coming here. It's already here, but it's going to come here in a much more violent way in the immediate future.
Absolutely. And then people like John Brennan and Muhammad Ali Biari and Mohammed Majid and Janet Napolitano for appointing Ali Biari to the Homeland Security Advisory Council, and all the rest of them, they are going to be the ones responsible for what happens here. But I don't know if even at that point there will be anybody at the high levels of government who will be willing to hold them responsible.
Right. Well, and that's the issue. I mean, it's my position that we need to take action 5 years ago, but now would be a good start. We're on the downside of the curve of their strategic plan being implemented here in North America. And they are so well on their way, and the problem is because of their understanding of our system. They have, and even organizationally, when they go into organizations, they don't go into leadership positions necessarily. They go into advisory roles, policy roles, to write policy for the various government agencies, because they know how powerful that is. and they go into like HR departments.
Mm-hmm.
So who gets hired, who gets fired? I mean, they are superb at what they're doing. And it's going to be very difficult to unseat this this movement here in the United States, but it can be done. And I really believe it can be done relatively quickly, but not painlessly. And it's going to take the American people to decide that action has to be taken. I don't think it's going to happen at the federal level.
John,
It's not going to happen at the federal. I believe it's going to happen at the state level.
yeah, because I was going to ask you, well, I'll ask you now. This is not a party issue, and I think we need to emphasize that. Is that right? I mean, it's not as if the Democrats are compromised and the Republicans are not. They're both compromised. Is that correct?
That's correct. That is absolutely correct. This is a bipartisan failure, leadership failure. And the leadership of the Republican Party is just as unwilling to discuss this. Remember when Michelle Bachmann and the other members of Congress came forward with those requests to have investigations open? Just get the questions asked. That was all these members of Congress were requesting. It wasn't the Democrats and it wasn't the Muslim Brotherhood that came after her. It was the Speaker of the House and Senator McCain, both Republicans, obviously. And they shredded her. And that kind of cowardice and that kind of unwillingness to go after our enemies and to even look at the truth. I'm not sure what to call that other than what I just did, but this is a severe problem that crosses party lines. On the left, if you will, let's say in the Democrat Party, the Brotherhood usually comes after them or engages them with regards to civil rights issues and with regards to those kind of social issues. With the Republican Party, when they meet them, it's usually fiscal issues, and it's issues of, we're part of the American quilt too. It's the patriotic stirrings. We're patriotic too, and yet it was, President Bush had many failings in this issue and failing to address men who were either working in his government to advise him or working in his cabinet. One of the most prominent Muslim brothers, Suhail Khan, worked for two successive secretaries of transportation in very senior positions, and on 9/11 was working as a volunteer in the White House. And his father was literally one of the most senior Muslim brothers in North America. ISNA has an award that they give out annually called the Mahbub Khan Award. So it is a bipartisan, failure.
And Suhail Khan that you mentioned is a very prominent person in the American Conservative Union and the Conservative Political Action Conference. That is the largest gathering of conservatives that takes place every year. This year it's in March 2013. This is a guy who, as you say, his father was a senior Muslim Brotherhood operative. He himself has an incendiary video was uncovered of Suhail Khan speaking in the 90s in rather lurid terms about Islamic martyrdom and so on. And he is connected also he is a protege of Grover Norquist. And can you tell us anything about Grover Norquist's role in all this?
Yes, just one thing you said that Suhail Khan has an organization called Muflihun, and he's the two leaders of Muflihun are him, Suhail Khan, and Mohammed Majid, the president of ISNA.
Oh my!
Yeah, you don't need to go very far. However, he said at a year ago at CPAC, Suhail Khan said there is no Muslim Brotherhood in America.
And there he is he's partnering with the leader of an acknowledged Muslim Brotherhood group. ISNA has even admitted its ties to the Muslim Brotherhood in an attempt to get its unindicted co-conspirator status erased. But they admitted that they had ties to the Muslim Brotherhood in the past. And so is there any interpretation you can put on his words other than that he is knowingly lying?
No, he was knowingly lying. This is a guy whose father, again, was not. And when I say a senior Muslim, he founded three of the most prominent uh, Islamic organizations in North America, Muslim Brotherhood organizations. His mother worked with the Hamas group in San Francisco. He is a known quantity and a protege. And the Al Qaeda financier Abdurrahman al-Amoudi spoke gleefully, if you will, about his father and about Suhail, about how he's following in his father's footsteps. And Suhail Khan has never denounced his father's activities here in North America. And obviously, you're correct. ISNA, they've changed it on their website so many times, but they did for a while say, while we were founded as a Muslim Brotherhood organization, we've separated. And as good friends of mine who are still in the FBI have said, where's the evidence that ISNA is no longer part of the Muslim Brotherhood movement? And the answer is there's none, not one shred of evidence. So Suhail Khan is a Muslim brother. He is an enemy of the state, and yet he's been given amazing access at CPAC and in other organizations. You mentioned Grover Norquist.
Yeah.
Grover Norquist is part of the great triad, as I've heard it called, of the three individuals that kind of grew up together in the Republican Party, if you will, and that would be Karl Rove, Grover Norquist, and Matoff. These guys who come up together. We know the one story: one in jail, one a Karl Rove, senior Republican strategist, and Grover Norquist. And what's the key here? Well, I think the key is Grover Norquist has facilitated under the Bush administration people like Jihad Watch. He was almost the John Brennan of the Bush administration. He facilitated getting Abdurrahman al-Amoudi, Al Qaeda, Jihad Watch, Hamas, Sami al-Arian, Hamas, Suhail Khan. He facilitated getting these individuals into the government, into positions in the government, into sitting down and meeting with people, to include President Bush when he was still a candidate. So you've got that. Grover Norquist founded the Islamic Institute with checks that we know came directly, because we have the actual checks, came directly from Abdurrahman al-Amoudi, the Al Qaeda financier. And so you've got an organization created that Grover Norquist headed, that in fact was created by with money from an Al Qaeda financier. There is more evidence, but I think right there we could almost take a pause and just say, how is this possible? And yet he is also, Grover Norquist, defended by many in the Republican Party.
Well, that's where the problem lies. That he is the head of Americans for Tax Reform, and so Republicans who want to be fiscally conservative and responsible, they, I think, all too often feel beholden to him, don't they? And then that leads to their not daring to question his Muslim Brotherhood ties.
Yes, I think that's right. I think this is an appropriate time to say this, because I think what we're laying out in the questions you're asking really reveals this, what I think is the paramount truth in this, on this topic. And that is, the problem isn't the Muslim Brotherhood. The problem isn't the Islamic movement. The problem is us. The problem is we are so convoluted. We've lost, I believe, as an American government, not necessarily as a people. And I know that the people are the government, but the elected officials, as well as the appointed officials, have lost a clear understanding of our founding principles enumerated in the Declaration, and then that first great attempt to build a nation under the Constitution, and then the amendments since its ratification, that this is really the great experiment. But when we lose those founding principles, and we lose the rock upon which the nation was founded, and we start drifting, and we believe that, well, what China does is just as good as what we do, And what Yemen, their form of government is just as good as we do. And really, to say that that's not true is to be mean and judgmental. And we don't want to do that. We need to be tolerant. This whole moral relativism, which you have spoken on many times, it's not only killing us in the realm of just ideas, it's killing us in terms of truly destroying the fabric and the foundation of this country from within. But we're surrendering it. The Muslim Brotherhood did not have success in this country, especially as it started to really accelerate in the 1990s, because its plan is just the greatest ever. They're taking a plan that's been used for centuries. Slowly insinuate yourselves into a society, put yourselves, gain traction in the society, and their documents say this is exactly how they're going to do it. I mean, other societies have been brought down in this way. It's certainly how power is taken over in governments. So the idea is not new. What made it effective here, especially in the United States, is a weakening of our foundational principles. And that's a whole discussion on its own, but that touches on our understanding of our founding principles as a people, how we educate and require our children to be educated, what is required of an elected official to hold office, and when can you impeach that in official, or when can you impeach judges? Because what the founders' ideas of that and what we do today, I mean, we accept elected officials have always said things that weren't true. And as Harry Truman said, we can call it a fib if it makes you feel better, but it's a lie. But at some point there is a mechanism in our government to hold these people accountable. However, when that mechanism fails, when individuals and organizations step forth to speak the truth, and that the power of government is used against them to shut them down, now you have a very serious destruction of individual liberties, and that's tyranny, and that has to be addressed by the people. And I think it begins at the state level again.
Well, yeah, it would seem as if with both parties so beholden now to the Brotherhood, so compromised in the light of Brotherhood initiatives to infiltrate the government as well as the opposition party, that I don't know that there's a fix that could come out of Washington. But how would you say that the states can start to reverse this terrible process?
Well, you're seeing some of it. I mean, states are sovereign under our Constitution, and under our Constitution, Article 10 specifically says, it gives the states, when they are in imminent danger, the ability to not only individually but to band together. And actually, there's a colleague of mine who's a constitutional lawyer who has just written on this in an article in Newsmax, and that issue, I think, is serious. Is that as a state determines, the leadership of the state determine, and I have met with governors of states, of attorney generals of states. I've briefed approximately a dozen state legislators, either in large part or certainly the leadership, meaning the two different bodies, their leadership. So the 5 or 6 key leaders in each chamber of those state houses. And they understand that the federal government, number one, is not protecting them. That what they're doing at the national security level is endangering the residents of the states that the representatives of whom I've spoken with. So they're going to take their own actions. And how do they do that? Well, you see the lawsuits about something like what's being called Obamacare, that they're saying this is a constitutional infringement of our state. You're telling our citizens of this state that they must do something. And the federal government has no right to impose your will on our citizens in this manner. And the courts are ruling that is in fact the case. But when it comes to security issues, states like Arizona and Texas are saying to the federal government, we have Mexican drug cartel, Hezbollah cells, Hamas cells, Al Qaeda cells coming across the border, and you are failing to do what you are required to do under the Constitution. So we're going to take action. We're going to form task force at the local level. You've got in Texas and California and other areas, you've got sheriffs coalitions. You've got other coalitions there to actually defend the citizens. I mean, you've got road signs in places in the United States 100 miles north of the Mexican border that warn citizens to be cautious because they're entering a dangerous area because of the Mexican drug cartel. 100 miles north of our border. I mean, this is outrageous. I talked to Texas officials. I talked to officials in some of these other states, and it is a war zone down there. So this is very, very serious. And that's why I believe at the state level, the state governments are going to have to take care of this and deal with these issues, because the federal government is broken in any way to handle this. Yeah.
John, we only have about a minute left, and this has been a fascinating discussion. Any final thoughts?
Yes. All of this sounds grim, the Islamic movement, as well as the threats from Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, certain factions in South America, as well as other parts of the world. And we're engaged in battles all over. But I think the one unknown variable and the one key variable that the Muslim Brotherhood, the Islamic movement, and our other enemies fail to recognize is the American people. And when stirred, and I believe the American people are starting to get stirred, they will hold their leaders accountable. They will, at the local and state level, ensure that their own locale and state are defended and
I
will
hope
prosper.
so. I hope
think
so. Your
Americans are
mouth to
coming
God's
alive.
ear. John Guandolo, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Robert. I really appreciate it.
It's extraordinary information you have, and I hope the American people will hear and take heed. This has been ABN's Jihad Watch program. I'm Robert Spencer. Thanks for joining us. Good night, and God bless you.